Good morning. Today is the January 20th. And I'm going to read what I've written. It still needs fixing and just from what it's at right now, but 26 pages. 11,000 words. Written since sometime after Christmas. So here we are. I don't know what to call it yet. So after I was published, I was bankrupt. I no longer had money for rent. My son and I were homeless, and a family member reluctantly allowed us to stay. It was not a comfortable situation, but rather toxic. My mind was in a state of limbo. I quickly found a job and worked a full week, but it was not ideal. And within that first week, our host drunkenly kicked both my son and I out as it was getting dark outside. We were invited over to another family member's home, and after having just experienced that dark side of humanity, we were grateful to accept. It was not the most ideal living situation either. A madhouse of 3 kids and 1 adult that stayed in an upstairs room for most of the day. I was still in some shock over the consequences of my actions. I focused on cleaning and helping my family members. I needed something to do. Money was fleeting always, and yet I still didn't feel I could leave New Mexico for some reason. In the month of July, I dabbled with promoting my first book. First, I tried some online forums. The response that I received was that I was a shill, a grifter, and a liar. Some called for me to prove it. Do a miracle, they said. Unsurprisingly, I reached and went, oh, but how? A little while later, I read a news report that I took as a sign. In Sandpoint, Alaska, an earthquake off the coast had initiated a tsunami warning. There was also a mention of one of the nearby volcanoes spewing. This is a remote place. It doesn't receive mention in the mainstream news often, and that is where chapter 0 of my story began. I had asked for directions. What, though, would qualify as proof? Chapter 1 was Maui. What would work? It had seemed that the Sandpoint event was elemental, largely that of earth and water. The volcano factor had me a little unsure, but I felt kind of more like a wink than the event. In tarot, 1 is symbolic of the magician. The other 2 elements I had thought would be air and fire. On my mind was Revelation 13:13, where the wild animal performs signs, including bringing fire from the heavens. How would I accomplish that? It was a bit of a chicken-egg dilemma. And no one was paying attention to me. So, how would I do it? I did consider publicly stating my intentions on Reddit. It didn't go that far, however. It was more than the fear of losing faith that stopped me. I would have been admitting that they had goaded me. Instead, in a desperate desire to prove the truth to her, that this was real, that she was part of this, whether the conscious part of her was willing to accept it or not. In a signal message, I briefly mentioned to her of my intentions that I was considering targeting Maui. In that message, I also conveyed I was dealing with suicidal thoughts that would come and go. This is what I wrote to her on July 23rd, 2023. So, I'm trying to understand my suicidal thoughts. They seem to happen frequently in a given day, but with days in between without. I will have a good day followed by one where I just don't know where I don't want to do this anymore. And while there might be freedom in no longer concerning oneself with the future, making plans to die might be some type of self-defeatism too. I'm only going on because of faith. I can never accept that I am merely insane. I was more careful than that. Something was happening. Something drew me to that path. Something told me I would find answers in the stars. I was careful. I kept careful track of logical fallacies. I applied logic to places most Christians don't think, like the prophecies. Who cares if no one else in that world agrees? And I'm supposed to use that iron rod. Plagues poured out, and most importantly, guidance for the humans. That is what is on my shoulders, and instead of deciding ways of achieving that, I am circling the drain financially, which is resulting in my wanting to quit, and from this height there is no return, no matter. The Son of Man can be translated to mean something like the one with inheritance of humankind. It is not Jesus. Everyone wants to see the miraculous to believe. For people to believe, they need to be looking first. Sandpoint gave me an idea. That was zero. Fool me. Maui was the next place. I really hope that whatever happens doesn't come with a high price. You better be reading this, or this isn't going to work. End quote. I didn't know how exactly. It needed to be extraordinary, clearly of both wind and fire. I thought to use a hurricane. The fire part, I simply couldn't visualize either. Neither was I looking to kill more people than a regular normal event. A few possibly. I did not constrain it. The working to no loss of life, and I left it open. It was also the first time I ever admitted to specifically using multiple elements. It was on my way to Albuquerque to find a cool place for several hours that I felt something happen inside as I inadvertently opened up. This is at around mile marker 218 I discovered later. And something was there with me. I remember feeling agitated driving, passing the center of the city and exiting the freeway, stopping for a second to clear my head. Looking back towards where I had just passed, a giant plume of black smoke was rising up. I had learned later that a recycling facility had caught fire. Apparently just as I had driven past, otherwise I would have seen the smoke on the freeway. Visiting a mall and walking around helped release some of the agitation I was feeling, enough to choose a destination, which was a movie theater showing Oppenheimer. I have wondered at times what events may have occurred if I had watched the movie Freedom instead, which was also playing. The movie paints a picture with a slow brush of the physicists that spearheaded the development of the first atomic bombs in recorded history. I found myself moved by such devotion to create the daringness, a reflection of my own. The events here right here in New Mexico, only an hour away from where I watched in a theater nearer to where she was, events played out that altered the trajectory of humanity forever. Alas, there was a moment at the end of the film, after an invocation of Shiva, when I was filled with love for the beauty of such raw, destructive power, that I felt a release inside. Images flickered in my mind as quickly as hummingbirds' wings. My dilemma of Maui, the mental image of the banyan tree and a night in Lahaina. The last time on vacation with my mom, dad, and sister. A time when I was still naive and innocent. Memories flicked as command. Memories attached with only love. I did not know what I was doing. I do remember trying to hold back like one might with an orgasm. Something happened I felt in those few moments in the movie theater. Something spawned from love, not hate, anger, or fear, but a love for the beauty of it. On 8/9, several things happened. I heard news that fires, driven by winds from a nearby hurricane, had laid waste to Lahaina, Hawaii, on the island of Maui, 17 days after I had expressed my mind. That news was shocking, not only at the success of the working, but the brutal reality of it. People, a lot of people, were burned alive. A town was destroyed, leveled, and I knew it was my work. How did I feel about myself now? It felt I was a blatant murderer. In the travel brochure for this earthly position, having the divine authority to do something does not negate the awful self-truth that I was a killer. The young and the old died in those fires. I was in silent shock and dazed from meeting her. That needs to be rewritten, but it was also exciting. A mythical level event had just transpired, and I was very much a part of it. I wrestled with wondering how I could ever wish to lay claim to such sacrifice. Why had it been so many? The other thing was that President Biden came to town that day, not as in he was visiting Albuquerque. No, rather he went to visit the windmill factory, where the only employed person in the house had recently began a more lucrative position, just outside Rio Communities, where I had rented a house. The street leading to my storage unit had been blocked off by cops. That was a lot of weirdness for one day. On 8/12, I went to a gathering where she was presenting her new book. Like I said, I was in a state of shock. I had anticipated the meeting for weeks, hoping to reconcile the thoughts and the way I felt. Hoping to finally talk to her face to face. Yet my internal state was massively in flux over the recent. She gave her presentation and then disappeared with some people. An hour or so later, I saw her from a distance and decided to approach. She was standing in front of a tea vendor. I really wanted to have that cup of tea with her still. And just as I was within speaking distance, she turned around. I don't know if she heard me ask her to have tea. She simply walked past me with only a heavy hi, almost as a sigh. I didn't chase after her, feeling it would be inappropriate. I sat down and had tea and made conversation with strangers. Later I danced, and it felt good to be with others somewhat like myself. It had been a really long time. At dusk, I left, knowing I would likely regret not camping at the event. She had left and not returned. What was the point of attempting to establish connections in a community if I was leaving? So I had felt in that moment. It hurt, and I had done my best at hiding it. I didn't feel like wearing that mask any longer than necessary. Plus my son had attended, but he had not joined in. Maybe it would have been best to leave him where we were staying, but I would have felt bad doing that as well, leaving him to bake all day in a house with no working cooling. 81 miles back to where I was staying according to Google Maps. My recently acquired random license plate, and that's a story of itself, was A12 XCL. That's the date. And the moment on that freeway was the date in reverse. No, I can't make this stuff up. I didn't think I would ever see her again after that. I had tried again and failed to have any meaningful dialogue. Afterward, I looked at the astrology of that day, and I truly felt that by not staying that night, I may have made the biggest mistake of my life and had missed something of profound importance. Then I really felt like dying. Further adding to that desire was days later when I was banned from the video sharing platform Locals after a comment I had posted. No warnings, nor any reason was given. I was appalled. Here she was, Queen free speech absolutist, and she had banned me from her paid platform. No explanation, no commentary, nothing. I was pissed and hurt. The hypocrisy seemingly blatant. I left New Mexico. I drove north, leaving a day before my birthday, stopping only for fuel, to eat, and to pee. I didn't rest until reaching Washington. The only gift I received on my birthday was a sign at around 3 a.m. on the 27th. I had pulled off at Baker City, Idaho to refuel. I was at my edge, awake for most of a day, and had driven 1,100 miles. And I began feeling some confusion as to where we were, and I remember having an emotive outburst. Not terribly bad, but I had lost my cool. Entering town, the first station's pumps did not work, so I crossed the street to the other station. And that is likely why, after I was done, my bearings became crossed, and I entered the freeway back the way I had just come, heading east. It didn't feel right, and I began looking for the next exit so I could check the map. When it came up, it is when I saw the unmistakable red and yellow glow of a large fire. Driving a little further, I parked alongside the road where down below was a large manufactured home with flames licking out on one side. I called it in, and by the time that was finished, made lengthier by not having an address to report, the entire building was engulfed. I could feel the heat from over 100 feet away. There was no longer any chance of approaching the door to check for occupants, although I considered doing so before I had made the 911 call. The fire was beautiful and warming, symbolic in a way. We watched as various chemicals in what looked like the garage caught fire, changing the colors of the flames. It seemed like forever until the firefighters arrived. The nearby trees began to burn the top. It was an interesting moment to share with my son. I also couldn't help but imagine what burning up in flames must have been like. How horrible a fate. Could I really done this to so many? Why had this fire just happened? Because I lost my cool, like before with the water pipes bursting? Was this for me, or just for me? Or as a spineless person reasons, was this simply another so-called coincidence? I didn't think so. I was thankful for the diversion, even while knowing it came at a heavy price to others. My son stayed with friends, and I went off to my healer friend for a much-needed rest, where I worked on grounding down. Then, in early September, the next fire happened, while I underwent a therapeutic dose of MDMA. While I was blindfolded, listening to soft, tranquil music on headphones, comfy on a bed, a fire had broken out in an unoccupied cabin nearby. Volunteer firefighters had worked for hours to contain it, using buckets of water. Fortunately, a nearby helicopter with a bucket had also been around, and the pilot had lifted and dumped seawater to keep the blaze from spreading. When my friend informed me of the news, reeking heavier than usual of wood smoke, at the tail end of the pleasant MDMA trip, my first thought had been, what had I been thinking about? What could have caused it? I had only been exploring my own thoughts, largely around recent events, but peacefully, with nothing projected that I could recall. No emotive outbursts, no intentions of such kind had been made, or had I made one by simply wanting my friend to understand. No emotive outbursts. Or another part of me wondered if she had tried something while I had the blindfold on, like a bandaging perhaps. Could that have done it? The cabin that burned had belonged to someone else, someone close to my friend's boyfriend, a fatherly-like figure to him. They both agreed that while it sucked for him, it might overall be better because that guy had been building a house for an extended period while living in that cabin. This would force him to finish it. And altogether, that would be good despite losing a bunch of stuff. Around a week-long stay with my friend, I spent the next 3 weeks. After a week-long stay with my friend, I spent the next 3 weeks camping in forests around the Seattle area. I watched the salmon spawn up the Green River, thinking to myself, that was how I felt, spent of vitality. It was glorious, the energy of the salmon. They spent all of what they were in a mad rush upstream, even while blind from parasites eating away their eyeballs. They kept flipping. Their sexual energy, their sexual drive was palpable, with a surge as they initially arrived in a drove, and waning as they died, littering the shallows and banks with rotting, floating corpses. I had never quite felt anything like that before. Eventually, it was time to make some serious choices, and choices were made of my son's own choosing, which was the third path that he had found. And so on the 27th of September, exactly a month after arriving in Washington, I found myself in an airplane flying back to New Mexico with the plans of emptying out my storage and returning to deliver my son's belongings to him. He had decided he wanted to return to public school after the 2 years I had attempted to teach him at home. The way that he had chosen for himself is when I think he first rose to adulthood. He was 17. Even I had considered staying behind in Coeur d'Alene at the age of 17. My sister had left at 17, my dad at 14. It was not unusual in my family tree to seek independence early. Plus, he was in good hands. He had wanted it, and that was what mattered most. Indeed, it did work out for him. He started college classes, obtained his driver's license, began going to the gym, got a job, and found a pretty girlfriend. All the normal stuff that makes early life great. I could no longer give him what he needed, and that despite the shame I felt at my state, I was extremely grateful that others helped out, and provided with him the opportunities that I could not. He had been in resistance to me for years, and I think this is the common situation for single parents with teens. The more I pushed, with daily exercise for example, the more he dug his heels in. I could not fathom a solution to that type of resistance while in New Mexico, and until we found ourselves houseless, he didn't fully grok the situation, despite my warnings. It took experiencing the disorder, instability, and the recognition that his father was broken a bit for it to sink in. He was going to have to grow up, and he did. I felt the shame of it all, even as I rationalized it away with thoughts like, anyone in my situation, experiencing what I have, with seemingly little help, would have cracked. Seriously, it was such a wild wormhole that cracking was the only way through it. At the airport, saying goodbye on the street, not knowing if I would ever see him again, was truly difficult. I almost began crying. It was the first time stepping foot in the terminal since 2015. Most of the COVID stupidity was over. However, there was a near incident at the security checkpoint where people are treated like cattle. An older man directly behind me, wearing a face mask and well-dressed like a business person, had provoked the person in front of me. I had been waiting for empty bins to put my stuff in before opting out and getting the mandatory micro massage. The guy behind me decided to go up to the guy in front of me and trying to grab the bin the other guy was still using while bypassing my turn in line. It was a near assault and some verbal harassment, and the guy had the audacity to tell the security personnel, whom witnessed it, that the other guy had assaulted him. I rebuked the guy for his behavior in a way that I would never have been capable of before. I was not the same, nor did I have patience for even those of my elders that acted like idiots. No one was my superior. Watching the countryside melt away in just a few hours, I was reminded that I was going to be driving that same distance again soon, all over. What a strange sensation, and how small these bodies are. I returned again to the house of the family I had stayed with before. The house was in total disarray. I had only been gone a month. Again, I cleaned room by room over and over. I moved out of storage and had several garage sales. The last sale absolutely pointless, baking in the sun for far less than I would have been paid flipping burgers. It wasn't enough. I felt stuck again. There was a final cleaning project I wanted to accomplish for them. A large workshop and garage. It was bad. Trash everywhere. Mouse crap. There was no pathways. Just junk atop junk. Total chaos. My family member was looking to purchase a house after finally qualifying for a loan. The mess was a major impediment to that plan. They needed help. The shame of that mess and their continuing habits was observably heavy upon them. It took all those months of living there before I was finally able to receive permission to help them with this task. They didn't have the energy themselves, but I did, and sorting is something I am good at. I cleaned out the garage over a weekend at a frantic pace that depleted my own energy levels, and then I truly felt sick. Deathly feeling sick to the point where I could barely move my body around. I even wondered if I had been poisoned, possibly from breathing in mouse poison dust. With the energy change, the welcome to stay also changed. I had made an impact with this family, finding love for every one of them, even their dogs. However, it wasn't my place, and it felt time to leave before even being asked to go. In a way, I felt it was an important growth moment for that member of my family to express that desire for me to go, as such assertiveness was more difficult for her, and in kind I responded graciously. Shortly thereafter, and upon regaining some strength, I visited my grandfather's widow. To my great surprise, she gifted me $1,000, saying it was from my grandfather. And after speaking with my dad, he had loaned me another $1,000. I had enough to leave. I was doing my best to also leave thoughts of her behind, but it was incredibly difficult. Everything was linked together. Thinking about anything reminded me. I had continued sending messages on Signal. I rationalized that if she had blocked me, as she had told me long ago, why would it matter if that was so? And if she was secretly listening, that would be her choice. Yet I still felt some shame at the despair and the obsession I had demonstrated in some of those messages. And I had opened myself at a level of honesty very few share with anyone, and especially with someone they didn't know well. It is difficult to properly explain the various mental and emotional states of being I have experienced. Call it psychosis if you wish. The Signal messages were so very raw. If she was listening, despite what she had said, then maybe she might consider it harassment. But again, it was her choice. She had claimed to be a free speech absolutist, and if that was true, it was well within my rights to continue to attempt communications. Even if I was totally insane, and I do not believe that, it was within my rights according to concepts she publicly endorsed. If, however, I was correct about who I am, then my authority exceeds all human law. The end result was a self-documentation comprised of hundreds of Signal messages, including the message of attending a magical act in Maui. Once I left New Mexico, the messages became less frequent. I wanted to understand so badly. Unlike a typical case of a broken heart, this was more than letting go. Large amounts of blood had been spilled. There was no easy escape from this gravity. The struggle with the darker elements within, cold and violent aspects, seemed perpetual once I became aware that something had been there inside. Every moment I had to be careful with my thoughts and emotions. It had seemed a worthy process to document, and Signal was where I had stored my ongoing day-to-day thoughts and experiences. Also, I wasn't sure if I was going to live long enough to publish more work, so these messages to someone that I loved and trusted, oh, but why did I? Might be all there was to explain. I drove a slightly different route going north, passing through Los Alamos. In my van, I had left a hole for me to sleep in, under a table facing the sliding door. It brought out some feelings of claustrophobia, I admit. I spent a day at Brighton Bush looking for any pooling as to where to go. In the spiral tubs, which are 4 pools laid in cardinal directions, I found myself in the west pool. There is a sign above the pool giving a meaning of west, describing it of the element of water. And the next day I was driving west. At around Rose Lodge, I just noticed a plume of smoke along the highway. A fire had just began ahead of me. It was a small storage shed. I parked and watched, taking it as a sign that I was going in the correct direction. I drove in through Lincoln City, still unsure why exactly I was on the coast. Then I remembered a friend that lived nearby in Tillamook. I was not entirely sure how she would respond, as I was feeling a little bit low about myself, living in a van, and she was a medical doctor. Her generosity surprised me, and even just spending time with her and her 2 young boys was genuinely therapeutic. Normalcy can be refreshing from the road. She allowed me access to her house when I needed showers and laundry, occasional nights in her spare bedrooms, and a full house sitting while she was out of town. It was nice having a close friend again, especially after the many years of social isolation. She was like a sister to me. I decided to give the Tillamook area a try. It was November and beginning to get cold. Down to $200. I began searching for work and applied at a farm that grows ornamental flowers, not ganja. It was for minimum wage, but came with the perks of a bunkhouse. Obviously, it wasn't flower season, and when I showed up for the first afternoon, I learned what we were doing. Firstly, we were digging up tubers, the delicate and spindly roots of dahlia plants, and sorting the 100+ varieties in crates where they were brought inside out of the freezing cold. Then they were all washed and stacked to dry. I did several weeks of washing, standing all day, wearing full rain gear, with a high-pressure hose spraying cold water. I got used to numb hands in the rain and the snow. Nice. I wanted to try what other people were working on, and eventually I was able to convince the farmer to allow me to allow me a try at the indoor work of dividing tubers using a sharpened linoleum knife. Each offshoot needed to be cut with an intact eye. The largest the farmer would sell, and the smaller ones would be planted in the spring. It was the challenge of learning how to divide the tubers that was motivating for me. My knife skills were already highly evolved from years of using one as a primary tool. This was a new technique, difficult to describe as it is to learn, involving using the hook to swivel cut chunks around the eyes. Identifying the eyes themselves was half the learning curve, as many varieties they were near invisible. The other thing that's quite major is that you cut towards your support hand. The first few days, that caused my mind to reel, as it was a completely